everyone. Welcome to today's Shoot Talk. We will be having Jacob Martin, all the way from New Zealand, give us a talk this evening. He's already showing a lot of nice pictures and videos about flames and candles. Yeah, so we're going to hear a lot about that tonight. And Jacob is from the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology. Yeah, so make welcome, Jacob, at the stage. Okay.
Great, welcome to the living room where I have lots of fire around me. So I hope you'll enjoy all of the pictures and all of the interesting science. Right. Okay, so just wanted to mention quickly that I'm part of Professor Marcus Kraft's group, computational modeling group. So there'll be quite a lot of modeling work and also some experiments as well for you to try at home. All right, so today's talk is going to be split into two. Firstly, we're going to talk about Michael Faraday and the chemical history of a candle. And secondly, we're going to talk about Rosalind Franklin and the structure of an ember. So in 1848, Michael Faraday gave a series of lectures on the chemical history of a candle. So this is a picture from that lecture theatre. It's actually him teaching electromagnetism, but you get the idea. And he did a variety of quite fun and simple experiments that I thought I would begin with. And these are a few things that you can try at home. Please be safe. I don't want to be the cause of any emergency services being used. So the first experiment that he did that I think is quite nice is if you blow out a candle, you'll have a white vapor trail that will come up from the candle. You can reignite the top of that, and a flame front will run down and reignite the candle. And what this is demonstrating is that it's actually the wax vapor that is actually being burnt in a candle. Faraday went a bit further by putting a pipe into the base of a flame. And by extracting that liquid, that vapor, he showed that he could reignite the wax vapor at the end of the pipe. He then moved the pipe to the top of the flame and showed that a black smoke was emitted and that this could not be burnt. To show that actually what's in the flame is a solid particulate, he cast a shadow with the flame. And this shows that not only is whatever's in the flame that's emitting light is able to emit light, but also that it can absorb light. And so this shows that there's actually some sort of particulate matter inside the flame. He also ran his fingers through the flame. You have to do this quickly, don't go slowly. Or you can put a spoon in, any cold metal object as well will do. And you can collect some of the soot that is produced in the luminous part of the candle flame. And so this luminosity is actually from this soot that is glowing yellow hot. And the last one that I don't think he did, but it's quite a fun one to try at home, is if you can get some sort of metal gauze, say for example from a tea strainer, and if you place that into the flame, you'll quench the flame because the mesh will cool down the flame, and then you can actually see inside of the candle flame. And what you can observe is that it's actually hollow. So Hooke actually did this first with a window of mica, but you can see that the luminosity is in an annular configuration around the outside of the flame. Of course, we've got much better experiments now in 2020. So let me give you an update on some of the most remarkable ways in which we can probe the formation of soot. So firstly, using electron microscopes, we're now able to image the atomic structure of carbon materials, which is quite remarkable. On the top right there is a scanning probe microscope, and these are now able to directly image the molecules that are present in soot, so we can get bond resolution of molecules, and I'll show you that soon. We're also able to use stadium-sized synchrotrons do combustion experiments with those. By picking out particular molecules and using the X-rays to excite them, we can figure out exactly what small molecules lead to the formation of soot. And my personal favorite is the experiment on the International Space Station on the bottom right there. And if you ever wondered what a candle flame looks like in space, this is a picture of a candle burning on, I think, the Space Shuttle, 1997. On the left there, you see that the flame has the classic kind of tulip shape, but of course in space there's no buoyancy, so you don't get the convective flow that gives you that flame structure, and so it actually forms a spherical flame, which is quite beautiful. If I was to schematically show you the experimental results as a time series going from bottom to top, you can see that firstly we get small molecules being formed from the breakdown of the fuel. So things like acetylene. Now this polymerizes into small chains that then cyclize into aromatic molecules. So these are molecules that have 6-membered rings. And then as acetylene is added to those ring structures, we get larger aromatics. And here are some images from that scanning probe microscope I was mentioning before, showing that indeed we can image these molecules. And I've actually drawn the molecules that we've directly that IBM have now imaged. At some point, the molecules will then come together and form nanoparticles. And here are some of those pictures there. They grow then to about 10 to 20 nanometers, and then they aggregate together into this sort of fractal-like arrangement. And it's these microscopic, this is only 1/100th of the width of your hair, it's these microscopic particles that are glowing from the heat of the flame and giving us that beautiful yellow glow that you see all around me. But the big question that has been on everyone's minds since Faraday is how do the molecules nucleate into nanoparticles, right? So two main mechanisms have arisen in the field of combustion science. The first is a physical mechanism whereby the molecules grow to a size which is large enough that their physical interactions mean that they condense in the flame, so they form droplets. Now, you can compute the energy between these molecules, and you can look at the size of molecules in the flames, and you find that they are far too small to explain, to justify having a droplet at flame temperatures. So that's not happening. The second option is a chemical mechanism whereby you get radicals that can then polymerize and form kind of like a polymer. You can also work out from first principles the rate at which these cross-links could occur. And you find for this type of cross-linking reaction that's been proposed, it is also far too slow to explain the formation of soot. So that can't happen. So what I'm going to do is explain two very interesting leads that we have that we've been working on to try and solve this problem. So the first is the observation that some of these edges have more hydrogen than we expected. So that's called saturation, when a carbon atom has the maximum amount of hydrogen that it can hold given its structure. And I'll explain what that means soon. The second thing is that some of the molecules that we observed in the electron microscope had a significant amount of curvature, and this has some very interesting electrical implications. So what do I mean by a partially saturated structure? So here is a 5-membered ring at the perimeter of a molecule. You can see I'm drawing out this molecule here, and you can see that on one of the sides of that pentagonal ring, 2 hydrogens are present, and on the other there's only 1. We were able to compute the electronic structure of this, and we showed that this structure here, this carbon atom, is particularly reactive, much more reactive than we thought. We've also shown that these partially saturated species are highly, they've got a reasonable concentration in the flame. Why this is interesting and why it's different from what's been proposed previously is that the molecules can physically condense and then chemically knit together. And so this kind of represents this is a drawing of that, a potential middle way between the physical and the chemical mechanisms that have been proposed to date. And there's quite a nice Cambridge connection here in that partially saturated platelets were proposed in 1977 by John Abrahamson during his sabbatical in the chemical engineering department in 1975. So it's very interesting that we're finding evidence for such a mechanism only last year after such a long time. The second thing I'd like to chat about the soot formation is that when we image some of the earliest soot particles that we can sample in the flame using an electron microscope, each of these dark fringes represents one of these molecules on its side, scattering the electron beam. And what you find is that a lot of these contain significant amount of curvature. Now, curvature is due to the incorporation of non-hexagonal rings in the middle of the molecule. And this strains the molecule, flexes it, and causes it to have a bowl-shaped geometry. Now, we can compute the implications of this bowl-shaped geometry on its electronic structure. And what we found is that as the molecule is flexed, you actually get an electric field being set up along the molecule, or in chemistry terms, a dipole moment. Why this is interesting is that flat aromatic molecules don't possess this dipole moment. They only usually have a quadrupole. And that means that, that these curved molecules will interact much more strongly with charged species that we know are present in the flame. So what does this have to do with electrical control? Well, for a long time, it's been known that if you apply an electric field to a flame, you can significantly influence soot formation. So for example, here, this is a flat flame between two burners like this, with the fuel on the bottom and the oxidant coming in from the top. And the application of a couple of kilovolts across that burner completely eliminates the soot being formed. And for a long time, that's puzzled people because usually the aromatic molecules aren't known to be influenced or interact with charged species, and those charged species would be influenced by the electric field. Here's an experiment you can try at home if you're game. This is a electric fly swat that I took apart and put in between two pieces of cork. And you can apply the electric field across the flame, and I'll show you it. I'm about to add it now, and you can see that the luminosity of that flame reduced. And so that's a fun one to try at home, but watch out, it does short circuit through the flame, so you have to watch out for that. So working with Kimberly Bowell, a PhD student in the computational modeling group, we were able to develop a force field that allows us in the computer to simulate the way in which different molecules cluster. So we're interested in corannuline, which is a curved molecule, and coronene, which is a flat molecule. So you can see the yellow line here indicates the clustering rate for coronene with and without ions. And we found that there was basically no influence of having charged species present in the simulation. So the dashed line without ions is very similar to the filled line with ions. However, the situation's different when you have curved molecules. You see a significant enhancement in the nucleation rate when you have ions present. And that's because there's a much bigger interaction with these curved molecules. So how does this work? So the idea that we have is that whatever mechanism explains soot formation, that it can be enhanced and nucleated with charged species in the flame. So when you apply an electric field, you're generating many more smaller soot particles. And this has been experimentally confirmed that application of electric field produces much smaller and many more soot particles. And those have a higher surface area, and so they're much more easily combusted and removed from the flame. So I'm going to change over to looking at the structure of the ember. So what I'm talking about here is when you blow out the candle, the carbon that's left behind, the charcoal that's left behind, what's the structure of that? And it's got a nice connection with Rosalind Franklin. You probably know Dr. Franklin from her work on the structure of DNA. But before that, she actually did a huge amount of work in carbon material science. So for her PhD at Cambridge, she worked with the coal board to study the porosity that is present within coal. And this was important during the war efforts because these were used as in gas masks. So you could make a porous carbon that could be used to trap chlorine gas, for example. After her PhD, she got very interested in the structure of these disordered carbon materials. And she headed to Paris to learn how to do X-ray crystallography in an applied chemistry laboratory there. And here is a picture of her in France. And this is a typical X-ray pattern you get from these disordered carbons. I'll alert you to this band here, which is the 002 band, and that is indicative of stacking of aromatic layers. So graphitic layers, when they stack, you get this broad 002 peak. So it's actually the reflection of the multiple layers. Of course, she's most well known for this pattern, photograph 51, which shows the X pattern indicative of a helix. And if you look at that, you can also see some dots are missing, and that indicates that you've actually got a double helix. She went on to actually do a lot of work on virus structure as well. So she worked on the polio virus and also the tobacco mosaic virus, which is problematic for plants. And this is a model from the molecular biology laboratory in Cambridge, so the stairwell, and it shows the assembly of these tobacco mosaic viruses, which assemble in a helical structure. So it's a nice link there with the geometry of DNA also. So what did Rosalind Franklin find with carbon materials? Well, she was able to show with X-ray scattering that there are two major types of carbon materials. Those such as anthracene that when heated form an ordered carbonized material that when heated to high temperatures will form layers of graphene, which is graphite. This is a soft carbon material used in the lead of your pencil. But more often than not, she found that something like sugar, for example, would not form this nice ordered structure. It would form a disordered structure. And even when you heat it to extreme temperatures, it would never convert to graphite. Now, why is that weird? Most metastable forms of carbon, such as diamond, when you heat them to a couple of 100 degrees above room temperature, they will rapidly decompose into the thermodynamically most stable material, which is graphite at atmospheric pressure. Glassy carbon, this material down here, is very odd in that even when you heat it to extreme temperatures, to 3000 Kelvin, it will actually vaporize before it converts to graphite. So the big question in the field has been what causes this structure to be so metastable, perhaps the most metastable material that we know of. So the first thing that we contributed to this problem was using a variety of experimental techniques, mass spectrometry in particular, to explore the nanostructure of a charcoal. And we found that as you drill into this nanostructure, there's a large number of cross-linked, curved nanostructures. So if you use reactive force fields, we were able to show that you can reproduce this nanostructure by incorporating a lot of non-hexagonal rings. So you get this porous sort of graphene-like disordered graphene structure. But we wanted to go further than that and simulate some much larger structures. And there was a group, the carbon group at Curtin University in Perth, that had previously simulated some of the largest structures. And at a conference, we talked about how to analyze these, and so this is the next bit of work we did. So these are some of the largest structures of disordered carbon that have been prepared using a reactive force field. So we literally just place the atoms inside the box randomly and allow the reactive force field to break and form bonds, and these structures emerged completely randomly. And on the left, you've got a low density, something like that Franklin would have made for a gas mask. So it's highly porous. You see the pores here. And then as you go to 1.1 grams per cc, then you're getting some more layered and less porous. Now, charcoal is about 1.5 grams per cc. And you see, I've colored the non-hexagonal rings, that it's these non-hexagonal rings that allow it to continuously curve in a three-dimensional space. But we want to see what's similar between all the nanostructures. And so we were able to compute the curvature of these surfaces by looking at something called the angular defect. And that basically tells you whether it's a saddle shape, negatively curved, or a bowl-shaped, positively curved. I've colored red as negative and blue as positive in these plots above. And what we found is for all of these structures, they all possess an excess of negative curvature of the saddle shape geometry. Now, what's quite interesting about this is that this is a feature of minimal surfaces. So surfaces that are foam-like. And these are highly stable structures. And they're connected in 3 dimensions. And we think that this is the origin of their high reluctance to convert into graphite, because they would need to break a lot of bonds in 1 dimension. And that foam structure is just so stable. The second thing is, for the first time, we were able to reproduce this 002 peak, which, if I remind you, is due to the stacking of aromatic layers. You can see those ribbon structures here. This is a feature that's been seen for a very long time, but very hard to explain. How can something that's curved also be stacked? Surely they can't coexist. We found that they could coexist, and they exist through a very interesting set of defects. I recommend reading the paper if you're interested in more, but the critical one is this screw dislocation. So you see that the layers are actually continuously connected through a screw dislocation, which is the sheets breaking and then winding up in a spiral staircase sort of arrangement. Now, what's really nice about this is that Rosalind Franklin spent a lot of her time looking at helical geometries, and it's quite nice to see that a potential solution to the problem that she first posed on the nanostructure of disordered carbon can also lie in the famed helix geometry. So in summary of this, we can say that there's an excess of saddle-shaped curvature, and as the density increases, the layers just have to stack because there's nowhere else for them to go, and this stacking is allowed for by these screw dislocations. And this is just a render that we did of this structure. We've colored it according to curvature. And I just want you to appreciate just how beautiful this structure is. And to think that this is in the burnt out wick of a candle is quite remarkable. So in summary, we first looked at the luminosity in a candle flame, and I showed you some of the interesting electrical aspects, and also the type of partially saturated reactive edges that we think is important to help explain how the soot forms. The implications of this is that soot contributes to climate change. So if we can reduce the amount that's emitted from combustors, we can quickly reduce a large contributor to climate forcing. Secondly, it's bad for human health. You don't want to breathe it in. And more recently, they've shown that there is direct links between susceptibility to viruses, for example, coronavirus, I think SARS, they showed a direct correlation between air quality and your susceptibility to respiratory viruses. And last, I showed you some of the interesting electrical control work we've been doing. Secondly, looking into the charcoal structure that's left behind, we saw a beautiful 3-dimensionally disordered graphene nanostructure. We're looking at this as a potential carbon capture technology because it's such a stable nanostructure, as I mentioned. The more porous structures can actually be used for things like hydrogen storage and methane storage. And the hard carbons are also used in batteries such as sodium-ion batteries. And with that, I'd like to just thank all of the people that have contributed to this work. So these are people from Professor Marcus Kraft's group. Professor Marcus Kraft's a fellow at Churchill. So all the PhD students and postdocs. I'd also like to thank our collaborators at Tsinghua University, at Curtin University, and finally, I'd like to thank our funders, National Research Foundation, and thank you all for tuning in to this fireside chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jacob, for that very interesting presentation. I was wondering if anyone has any questions. Yes, Abbas, please unmute and go on.
Sorry, I was just clapping electronically. Very good job, Jacob. Thank you very much for the overview.
Yeah, thanks.
May I ask, since I'm also a combustion guy, but I'm the opposite side of the spectrum because I focus on the application and combustion turbulent flames. I wonder if all this work you have been doing can be translated in a way that you can, let's say, modify chemical mechanisms that are existing at the moment, and actually being able to do simplified calculations in laminar or turbulent flames.
Yes, so thank you for that. So it's an interesting question as to how to translate some of this research into reductions in emissions. So one of the first things I'll say is that we're currently exploring two routes to do this. Firstly is changing the fuel structure, so the fuel mixtures. And by modifying the fuel mixtures, you can change the different types of reactive sites that are present and hopefully halt particular routes. The other option is if you can integrate curvature, you actually increase the reactivity of the soot. So that helps in after treatment systems. Finally, we're looking at using this electrical control to allow us to modify the air intake in ways that can modify the charge that's present in the combustion. In the combustor, and this has also been shown previously to significantly reduce soot emissions. So there's many ways we're kind of exploring to do this. However, I'm staying safely in the laminar camp at the moment because we barely understand what's happening there.
Thanks, Jacob. Do we have any more questions?
So was this talk finally recorded? Was this talk finally recorded? Can we also see it online? Because you had a very interesting historical aspects in the beginning.
It's saying it's recording at the top left.
Yeah, it is recorded onto the cloud. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah. So, Jacob, thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I would say thank you for that interesting presentation and for waking up so early in New Zealand, about 7 a.m. or 7:30 now. Yeah, so thanks for the sacrifice. If you could all help me appreciate Jacob, please, by wave of hand or however we could. So thank you. And then